folks from all the graduate schools here. See some HBS people, Kennedy School people, Ed School people. That's all great. See some Reynolds Fellows and some non-Reynolds Fellows, also great. So here's what we're going to do tonight. In a second, we'll introduce our panelists who are here, and we were just chatting. We'd like to do this as informally as possible versus a more formal format. By the way, I'm Stacey Childress. I'm on the faculty here at the business school, where I teach a course on entrepreneurship and education reform. And so while I have a broad interest in social entrepreneurship, I've spent most of my time over the last about 3 years thinking most specifically about organizations that are education related and entrepreneurial. So that's how I come at this. And I get on the faculty here and teach a second-year elective. I also have had just the great privilege and challenge this year of working with something called the Reynolds Fellows, which are students from all over Harvard who are themselves social entrepreneurs or aspiring social entrepreneurs and are at one of the what they call public service schools, so either the Ed School, the Kennedy School, or the School of Public Health. So if you're a Reynolds Fellow, we just kind of give us a wave. So it looks like about half the room probably Reynolds Fellows and half others. And so it's nice to have kind of a mix of folks who don't normally get to interact with each other in a classroom. So welcome. So here's what we're going to do. The kind of big topic tonight is how social entrepreneurs think about boards of directors. So we have a focus topic on boards, but we could cover that ground for hours, right? I mean, there are lots of topics under that heading to talk about. And so what Vanessa and I were just talking about was it would be nice to hear from a few of you what's on your mind about boards before we launch into some kind of more formal panel discussion, okay? So let me do a quick intro of our panelists, and then we'll open the floor and you can just say what's on my mind about boards is. And then that'll help us think about how to frame our time, since we don't have much time together. We've only got about an hour together, okay? So we'll do that. So Vanessa Kirsch from New Profit Inc. and Eric Schwarz from Citizen Schools, why don't you each take 3 or 4 minutes just to say who you are and what your organization does, and then we'll open the floor to some stuff on people's minds.
Well, it's great to be here. Boards is one of my favorite topics, mostly because I've had a lot of failed boards, but hopefully New Profit's board I've learned a lot of lessons and made some improvements and learned a lot. But New Profit Inc., I'm assuming maybe some people know what it is, but we're a venture capital fund for the nonprofit sector. And really, actually, Eric helped start it and was one of our first investments. The theory behind it was that it's a fascinating thing. 115 nonprofits start a day in the United States now. And one of the challenges is that 91% of them have budgets under $1 million. So we have a sector that's made up of a lot of really wonderful solutions to social problems, but none of them are truly scaled. And the number, there are only 35 nonprofits that are in the sort of social change arena, not hospitals or universities, that have gotten to $20 million since in the past 30 years. So we sort of pondered the question, why not? And as you look at the private sector, you see that the private sector has a very sophisticated entrepreneurial system that helps take that invention in a garage, and there are angel investors and venture capitalists and their private equity funds and investment banks that sort of take that organization through a set of phases. And aligned with that are consultants who help the startup entrepreneur, who come and help the mid-stage company. There's a whole consulting, accounting, management system. There are business schools like these that are really promoting entrepreneurship. And our belief was just that if we could do that same thing in the social sector, if we could really figure out how to take the best of the private sector, the best of the social sector, and create not only New Profit, which is a demonstration, but fundamentally what we're passionate about is figuring out how we really create a whole social capital market that helps us take great social innovations to scale. And that's going to require, ultimately, the bringing together of, I think we have to get government, business, academia, nonprofit sector to work together to think very systemically about how we solve social problems. So in a nutshell, New Profit is really a demonstration of that model, and we have about 50 investors. They're mostly private equity, venture capital, entrepreneurs, different people like that who pool their money, and we make $1 million cash investments in a set of organizations and then provide $1 million of consulting, because we're based at a consulting firm called Monitor, which is a management consulting firm. Monitor has done $30 million of pro bono assistance to our whole portfolio so far. And so we engage over a period of 4 years we're early growth capital to organizations to help them build their strategic plans, their balanced scorecard. We use Robert Kaplan and Ellen Kaplan, our investors, and personally do the scorecards of our organizations. And then we do help the organizations through the first phase of sort of becoming higher impact and more sustainable. And we take board seats, so I'm going to talk a lot about sort of the role of being an investor and having a board seat versus a citizen board seat.
We, as Vanessa mentioned, I'm Eric Schwarz with Citizen Schools. Started out at the beginning of New Profit. We were about in year 4, year 5. They were in year 1. Their next strategy, she didn't mention this, but the next strategy is going to be looking at mezzanine financing for the nonprofit sector, and we're again going to explore that. Because we want to keep on the cutting edge. And
by the way, we should say we're next door neighbors, and this is constantly debated. Eric might invent that part of New Profit so that we can do it.
Yeah, we're going to get the right board in there, and they'll be all set. But Citizen Schools, which started 12 years ago in Boston, really comes out of as an after-school program, but it's really looking to reinvent education, how we think about education across the country. And it comes out of a couple of core beliefs, one of which is that education is really more important than ever before to driving access to the American dream and driving opportunity. And the difference between sort of a high school graduate and a college graduate in terms of what they earned used to be the college graduate a generation ago earned about 30% more than the high school graduate. Today, the college graduate earns twice as much as the high school graduate, and that gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So education is just more important than ever before to driving access to the American dream, number one. Number two, education is unbelievably unequally distributed. And you have among families, among kids who grew up in upper income families, top economic quartile, a 98% likelihood of doing at least some college, and a 60% likelihood of finishing a 4-year college by age 25. And among kids who grew up in a lower income family, only 50% chance of doing a little bit of college and a 7% chance of finishing a 4-year college by age 25. So education is unbelievably unequally distributed. And our third core belief is that school reform alone is not enough to change those numbers. We've been trying really hard as a country to change schools. We've doubled the amount of money we spend on schools per pupil after adjusting for inflation over the last generation. And we've gotten really limited results. We think just if you keep schools in the box of 180 days a year, 6.5 hours a day, you could change who the teachers are and change the curriculum and change the standards. But in that box, we're not going to fundamentally change access to the American dream and change the quality of education that kids are getting. And so the premise of Citizen Schools, in resting on those beliefs, is that what we need to change is time and caring adults in kids' lives. And so we've built a model, starting at one school in Boston and now spreading to 5 states across the country, that works to fill up the afternoon hours and the weekend hours with really intensive learning activities. Built around an apprenticeship model where we recruit thousands now across the country of citizen teachers who are lawyers and architects and chefs and web designers, and ask them, along with the professional staff of young educators, to work with kids after the final bell rings. We add 40% to 50% more learning time for kids we work with, and we focus on middle school age kids. We build the curriculum around these apprenticeships at the core, where kids get a chance to argue mock trials in front of federal judges and design new websites for their school and work with architects to come up with new designs for what should go on the Rose Kennedy Greenway, work with engineers at Yahoo and Google to take apart computers and build up websites. And we also have a real rigorous kind of academic component where kids are getting homework help, coaching on their writing and data analysis. The 8th graders are going to visit 10 college campuses over the course of the year and getting kind of coaching as to how they choose the right high school and get ready to choose the right college. We've been very focused on results, which is more common in the nonprofit sector, but still not super common. And we've done a big external evaluation that we're about 4 years into that shows very strong results for our kids, not only when they're in the program, but after they leave the program. They go on to much better high schools. They do much better in those high schools. And we really are taking kids who are among the most at risk in Boston, which is our home city, and now 15 other cities across the country, and putting them on a trajectory to both high school success, college access, and success, I think, in life and the workplace. Last thing I'll say is just we've formed ourselves a little bit in the model of City Year, which is an organization Vanessa and I both know well, as an action tank, where we're trying to be a direct service organization, but also drive public policy change and drive a movement. And so we really, while a big part of our goal in the next 5 years is growing to working with 3,000 children this year to about 10,000 kids directly in 5 years per year. An even bigger ultimate goal is to leverage that impact and leverage those touches with those kids in those cities into broader public policy change and broader behavioral change for the country and a movement that takes a whole new look at learning in America. Because again, we think we're not going to fundamentally address the achievement gap unless kids have a whole lot more time for learning, a whole lot more caring adults involved in their lives. And that's a whole strategy that involves building up quality organizations, driving public policy change, and shifting the mindset of elites and others across the country.
So as you can see, a couple of really innovative organizations that have been around for a while, but not too long, and have really made an impact in the world in which they travel, both in terms of education reform, rethinking how philanthropy works, thinking about this action tank model, which is very different from the way nonprofits normally operate. And so you can imagine that there are some pretty specific governance lessons there that are wrapped up in the heads of these two. And so we want to make sure we pull them out. But when you came tonight, what were you hoping we'd talk about? So you saw it was about boards and you saw it was about social entrepreneurs.
And can I throw out a couple of categories just to,
Yeah.
It'd be useful to know if people are sort of, if they are interested in boards, is it the sort of early, how to build a first board? Is it building a sustainable board? Is it a issue of like what fundraising strategy? Like I'm just curious what's on people's minds.
Yeah, Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica, and my experience is with boards of a public charter school, nonprofit school. And one of the struggles that we had was, okay, so we need a board. We have to have a board. We want a board that's helpful. We don't want a board that's meddlesome. We like the independence that we have as a charter school. With the beauty of it is not having to engage in the political fighting that goes on in traditional boards and in education. So kind of finding that balance when you're building your board of a useful board, a productive board, but a board that's fundamentally working towards the same goal and not going to engage in, not be a struggle to make work. Yeah. So that's, I know it's probably
That's really helpful. That is.
Other thoughts about? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm working on a project with sort of a mature non-for-profit organization, which is sort of operating internationally. It's increasingly complex. And the project I'm working on with them is how they can figure out how to most effectively induct new board members into the organization, given the fact that there's sort of term limits. The quicker they sort of get up to speed, the more value they can provide for the organization. So how do you do that to board members who have lots of other things going on?
Something here?
Yeah, I'm Eric Savage. I'm a mid-career student over at Kennedy School. After leaving here next year, I'm planning to start a microfinance fund. And I'd love to get your advice as to kind of balancing bringing in people who bring kind of credibility to the board as well as versus people who bring direct access to finance and or investments. And then also just any general issues you can highlight as terms of challenges you've seen with boards and things that we or I maybe should be thinking about would be great.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Colleen. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm interested in early stage creation, but also building off Monica. The organization I was working with before coming to school, there were some tensions going on, of course, between the ED and the board. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little to it, if you come in as an ED with a board that is very involved and possibly over-involved, how do you as an ED work to kind of balance that or be able to move your own agenda?
And just to build on that, I'm Laura, by the way. Just sort of what is the sort of power structure / roles of the ED versus the president of the board, and how does that balance at any stage of nonprofit?
Up in the top.
Hi, I'm Martha Parker, and I'm a mid-career at the Kennedy School. I have a background in business, and I plan to switch over to the nonprofit sector. I sit on 2 boards now, one nonprofit and one profit, so part of this is like end-user comparison shopping to find out how we can do better, and then as I move into the nonprofit sector to learn from others of the mistakes not to make.
Mistakes not to make. Important. 2 other hands, yeah.
I'm Abby Fallick, and also have had experience sitting on nonprofit boards, small and larger, and for the most part have found that I'm learning by negative example. So I've seen little that has been really effective in terms of board engagement, and in working on the programmatic side of a number of nonprofits as well, we've really been challenged to find a balance. Often of finding high-profile people with people who are actually going to engage and get their hands dirty. So in addressing the question of how to build a board, looking carefully at sort of the types of profiles for people who are going to help you set up an effective, engaged board that will help you sustain yourselves and grow over the long run.
One more, yeah.
My name is Alejandro. I'm Colombian, and I served in a nonprofit board back at home. And one of the issues that the executive director faced was that one of the board members had sort of like his pet project that he wanted to like carry out throughout the organization.
I'm sure you guys have seen that.
And I'm just wondering sort of like if you have encountered this where perhaps this pet project fit the organization in a sense, but probably in the long run is not as much part of the vision and may like hinder some other projects, but just because the member is like vocal enough and has enough sort of like weight in the organization, it's hard to say no. So how to manage that and think about those issues, I think would be interesting.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a first year.
Okay, we stay till like 10 o'clock in the
Yeah,
afternoon.
just
I'm kidding, but it's just like there's just so many great issues that it's like, wow, we're going to have half an hour to tell you all. It's awesome.
It is awesome.
You have very clear questions. It's really impressive. Yes.
Mine's at least related to Abby's question, and that is after you have the composition of your board in place, how do you figure out what the most important things for the board to focus on are beyond the traditional oversight and fiduciary responsibilities? I did a case at Bridgespan that touched on this, and it was amazing how little agreement there was among experts. So I'm curious on your takes about, in general, the most important things for a board.
So Kate, when you say lack of agreement among people who are supposed to be experts about boards?
About boards. So
about which kinds of things
professors.
boards ought to be engaged in.
So whether it's strategy or
Yep.
fundraising or.
Let me make sure I understood. Okay. Did we scare y'all? Any more questions? Okay. This is, by the way, so this is great. So let's try to categorize these a little bit, and maybe start. I'm kind of linear sometimes. So why don't we start at the beginning?
Startup boards.
Yeah. So let's talk about when you start, because both of you have done this. You're building a board from scratch. Talk both about how you go about that, and then some of these other questions that people raise, like how do you decide a balance between big name credibility versus people that bring particular expertise versus people that you think will help get work done. Kind of those general topics of building a board that you hope will be as effective as it can be from the beginning.
We had sort of 2 phases to the startup board. There's the real startup of like the first 12 to 18 months, where the board was myself, my wife, and my partner in starting Citizen Schools. That was the legal board. And then there was a 10 or 12 person advisory board that had no fiduciary authority or responsibility. And we did that just because we didn't quite know what we wanted for that first 10 or 12 person legal board. So we said, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. Let's just get the inner circle to be the actual board while we're figuring some stuff out. and get 10 people we can put on some stationery. We didn't actually put them on our stationery, which we didn't have stationery, but we occasionally would put them on a letter to funders, say, this is our advisory board, these 10 people. And that was great. That worked really well. We got together, over those probably 15 months, probably 3 or 4 times with that advisory board. We didn't really need to have actual board meetings of the threesome, and there were no governance issues. And then,
There were marital issues.
there were marital issues which persist.
My husband had one too, so.
By the way, we're not sure that's a best practice. No. we can come back to that later.
So about a little over a year into it, we said, all right, we think it would actually give more credibility to say that we trust enough to have an actual group that's beyond the people who work at citizen schools and are married to them, who do have hiring and firing authority over me, the CEO, and have ultimate responsibility for the strategy of citizen schools. So we built, I think, a 12-person board. My wife got fired, me and my partner stayed on, and 10 others were brought in, half of whom came off the advisory board and half of whom were sort of new. And we focused, it's all a matter of degrees. They weren't big names, and that probably you wouldn't have heard of many or any of them. But there was a Harvard professor in there from the ed school, and there was another professor from another school, and there were a couple pretty high-level business leaders, and then there were a couple of real workers who were really key in helping us build an individual giving base and helping us set up. One of them was a finance whiz and helping us really set up a finance system. So it was a board that was built around rolling up their sleeves and really working with the management team on stuff in our first few years when we only had a couple people on staff. So you really needed to delegate important core functions to people who were volunteers. And then after about 5 years, we had to change. We've been through a couple of evolutions since then, but that was kind of the beginning.
Gosh, there's so many great things to cover here. Generally, New Profit focuses on taking boards from that founding process and the founding board and helping to build the systems where the board can start to have ownership, but not too much ownership. And I heard a lot about that. There are a couple of themes that that I've seen, and I think it's interesting. I've heard just from you all in the arena of boards, you hear more negatives than positives about what's worked. And it's probably the only place, like if I asked you about performance systems or whatever, good consulting, you'd hear many more positives than negatives. But in the board space, it's across the boards, it's really hard to hear. You don't see a lot of people who say, I've got the best board ever. And I think that's just worth noting. I think there's work to be done in this particular field. I've sat on 15 nonprofit boards. Most of them are through our portfolio organizations and others. And there are moments that boards have sort of best practices. But the themes that I look for, I think one of the themes that we should talk about tonight is alignment. Because figuring out the question of how you get a board aligned and how that alignment happens between, sometimes a board can be aligned but then not aligned with the executive director. So there's two sort of planes where you need alignment. And it's hard to do that in the beginning, and I think what Eric did is the right thing. In the beginning, you don't know what you're aligning around. So you really want a bunch of worker bees who are really basically auxiliary staff because you can't afford to hire your management team. And so you want more worker bees than necessarily big names at that stage. As you evolve out of that, you want to sort of start to think about who are the people who are truly deeply aligned. And I'd love to talk at some point about how you test alignment prior to boards. We started a practice now of testing out board members through strategy sessions and growth committees before we put people on the board. Because boy, you can ask the person, your best friend to be on the board, and boy, they can turn into a sticky wicket, when it comes to being a board member. And it's really important to really test out and set expectations, be very clear on what your expectations of what a board does and what their expectations are, because it's a marriage of which involves a lot of power dynamics later. And if you haven't sorted those out beforehand, it's really problematic later. And most of what I spend my time doing is undoing situations where people haven't sorted out expectations, haven't created alignment. So I want to talk about alignment. Other themes that I think is in the earlier stages of an organization, boards are largely strategic and really helping strategic direction. As our organizations, and this for the later stage discussion, as our organizations are getting into the sort of $20, $30 million range, a big portion of what they're doing is a fundraising board, and we can't, a lot of people say, do you want a fundraising board, a strategic board? You gotta have both, but I don't think we can shy away from a fundraising board. And it's a fundamentally challenging thing to try to build a fundraising board that is fundraising and strategic, and where you're still connected to your mission, and you don't have just a bunch of wealthy people who think they're the know-it-alls, but aren't really connected to the mission. And so that presents a set of challenges later in the game, which I'd love to talk about as we sort of address this. And then the last theme just is, because boards meet so infrequently, and I think that's an issue. The best boards I know either have a board meeting 4 times a year and a conference call in between, so that there is really regular communication, because in an entrepreneurial venture, things are changing on a quarterly basis. It's a whole new organization next quarter. And the tension between emergent strategy and agreed upon strategy, and how to balance that in a board, because a board it feels its job is to keep the strategy going, but they can't handle the emergent stuff, and so they always want to shut it down. And how you build a board that is responsive to emergent strategy and build that culture, and those are some of the things that I touch on.
That's right. Yeah. Why don't we actually dive into this alignment issue? Because I think that's important, both when you're building a board from the beginning, and then when you think about late stage. I mean, that's always always going to be important for an organization. So, and I know you've both learned a lot about that.
Can I dive in a little bit on that, and then you can go back to the, because on alignment, I would say on an early stage organization, I'd be highly cautious of how you add board members, and I think it's fine to have a group of people that are advisors and not give them the titles until you're really ready. And some of the best boards in the very early stages sign people up for a year and tell them they're all off in a year, because you can renew them if you want, but until you really know what works and what doesn't, and what the culture is and what the strategy is, you don't want to lock in people. I had one experience. My Public Allies, the organization I started before New Profit, we had 22 board members, and a guy named Ed Cohen, who was the founder of Eckman Green, told me that he would only give me money if I fired all 22. And I did personally go and ask every one of them to leave. It was a brutal process, and I had signed up all these people who were like exciting. I was trying to get every representation of young people, community people, funders, for-profit, and it was like too many people with too many divergent ideas, and it was hamstringing me. I wasn't able to be an entrepreneur and lead. And if you're being an entrepreneur, this is different, obviously, for someone who's coming in as executive director. But if it's a founder-driven organization, even Bill Drayton of Ashoka would say, just try not to get too many constraints when you're being inventive. You got to invent, you got to move, you just don't want a big board. And so I did go, and it was brutal, but asked every one of them to leave, and then rebuilt my board at Public Allies, and it made it, a small group of people who truly understood that phase. This is not on alignment, but so I think on the early stages, it's hard to know even what you're aligning around, and it's okay to just understand that you're picking people who are aligned around your leadership if you're creating your own. But on the one of the things we use, I like to say this in Harvard Business School, but the balanced scorecard is invaluable for us. Every one of our boards looks at their scorecard. A set of dashboard. First, you have to have a strategy. You have to have a very clear strategy. That is a huge problem with a lot of organizations. They actually don't have a clear strategy. Let's assume you get a very clear strategy. A lot of the strategy work happens with the staff and the consultants, and not with the board and the consultants. And then you present to the board, and the board isn't bought in. I really fundamentally, we won't do strategy without the board members involved. That's been a lesson learned. We got involved in a set of organizations where we did it with the staff, and the board just never bought into it. And I realized, gosh, you can't do strategy without your board. So board has to be involved in setting the strategy, then setting some dashboard measures, and then you have to be consistent, because you can't come from one board meeting and show these results, and the next board meeting some other results and some other results, and then they can't, keep up with the storyline. And so having that and a literal tool that is agreed upon, that keeps people aligned, and also it enables people to stay focused on the real issues. Because one of the problems is if people don't know what they're doing at a board meeting, they dive into the details of trying to run things, because people are naturally managers, and they want to get into the nitty-gritty, and you don't want them there. So you want to keep reminding them of what the arena that they're thinking about and where they're, and it also requires great leadership from a board chair. And I think that is the hardest thing, is a good board chair. A good board chair spends 10 hours a week on a board. And, we're searching for people who are retired or who can, it's very hard to find that kind of person who can put that time in. And if you don't have one, it's very hard to create the alignment, because if the social entrepreneurs trying to do all the alignment, they're running around crazy.
I think, just Eric, before you jump in, I think it's really important, Vanessa, you said, I don't think I've ever thought of it quite this way before, that at any stage of the organization, startup, growth, maturity, you're always trying to get your board in alignment with something. And eventually that's about strategy, whether it's delivered, emergent, depending on your stage. But at the beginning, you're trying to get them aligned around you and your leadership. That's really important. That early in the life, especially the social venture, where it's not clear exactly how to go to market, or however you might phrase it, that you don't need people to be a check on your
Like I chaired the board of
they need to
Jumpstart and new leaders, and for me it was good because I was an entrepreneur and I was just going to go with what John Schnurr and Aaron Lieberman wanted, and help sort of manage all the other players who were trying to influence and say, let's direct it at what they want. There was a time in which I wasn't the right board chair.
At some point, that's not what you need, right?
Yeah, because then they started saying, hey, this is not just about John Schnurr. We've got to build a sustainable organization. And that was then the evolution to a board chair that played a different sort of role. But in the early phases, I would make sure to have an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur as your board chair to help you, to relate with you and help manage that.
A couple of things I would just underscore. One is the importance of the chair. I think probably half of the issue of the board is the chair, and the other half is everyone else. I think getting the right, I think that's true in the first year, the 5th year, the 10th year, and the 20th year. So I think really getting the right person as chair for each phase is preeminent. Second, I think this, one issue is sort of the nonprofit world as a whole, boards and management teams. And then I think within that, the subset of the social entrepreneur, fast growth, fast change, is a whole different set of issues. And in general, I think in the social entrepreneur world, not just in years 1 through 5, but in years 10 through 20, it's much more, whether it's founder driven or whether it's just much more CEO driven. So that was equally true when it was Rob Waldron driving Jumpstart, as when it's Aaron Lieberman. It doesn't have to be the founder. Right. It's the CEO in the fast changing, high aspiration nonprofit who's really driving the organization, as opposed to the board being the real center and gravity of power for the organization, and the CEO and management team kind of implementing the plan that the board has kind of passed on through the generations. One of the things I think you need to do is you need to recognize that every 2 or 3 to 5 years, you are going to need a different kind of board. And you need to, one thing I didn't do well is to upfront that with the existing board. It's like in the social entrepreneur space, you're always doing sort of tomorrow's work today with yesterday's resources. And the board gets kind of brought into that. And so you need to, what I should have done back in '96 is kind of foreshadow with that great team of worker bees that probably by '99, we're going to need a very different kind of board. It's nothing personal, but I'm going to need to ask some of you to leave, or we're going to have to, have changed the board chair. It was a really hard process in '99, 2000 to change our board leadership, and then just a year or two ago we went to term limits, and that was a really hard process. And I was essentially firing. We had sort of 3. We retroactively put in 3 3-year terms, and then you're out. And so that meant that all those founding board members were kind of coming up to the end of their terms and putting in term limits, which I thought was necessary because I wanted to keep a small board, less than 20, between 10 and 20. but I needed a lot of new people to come in who could be million-dollar donors and just heavier players as we became a national organization. If you just do the math on that, you need to have term limits. So that was, I wish I'd foreshadowed that earlier. One, just that we're going to have the change, and two, specifically term limits is probably going to be part of that. I also agree, I think fundraising is the preeminent role of a nonprofit board. We don't have good if Vanessa's fully successful in her work and you're able to, by delivering great quality programs, can get the funding to grow and the funding to sustain yourself, then boards should appropriately be about different things, and they should play a bigger role in building your human resources systems and quality, et cetera. But now you've got to obviously build the systems and build the quality, but that's better done at the staff level. And the fundraising, a hunk of it needs to be done at the board level because of the connections that they can bring.
So a couple of you looked like you had questions about specific things that Vanessa and Eric were just saying. So why don't we take a couple of questions on the discussion we just had, and then we can open up a new topic. Monica.
Vanessa, you mentioned testing out board members. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Starting with Jumpstart, we created a growth committee and just, I don't know if you people would know these folks, but Judith Kidd, Jeff Braddock, a guy from Starbucks, and we didn't put them on the board. You'd think, sound like great people, put them right on the board. But we really wanted to test them out. They were all, so we created a growth committee. They came to one strategy session. Jeff Braddock, who runs Bridgebend, will always tell me this. He said, I thought I was coming to one strategy session, but it was so dynamic and so interesting. So two things you're doing. I mean, one, you're testing quirky people. And let me tell you, we had a meeting with about 10 people, and there were a couple that I said, ooh, like, I thought they were good, but no, boy, their passions came out about their issues with entrepreneurs or their, you learn a lot. And so we kind of said, okay, a lot of those people aren't good, but you're also using those sessions to take somebody who says, no, I don't need to be on another board, I'm not interested. You get them into this session, and it's really dynamic and really good, and they kind of say, okay. And in the case of Jeff Braddock, that happened, and then I said, great news, you want to chair the board? And he chaired the board. He'll, be upset with me forever on that, just because it just ended up going on, and then Aaron left, and he was stuck chairing the board while we were doing a CEO transition. It was a whole nother topic, because I think boards are great. Volunteer boards are great when things are great. But when things are bad, they often can absolutely evaporate. You can, and I've been on a number of boards where when things went bad, in the case of Jumpstart, we lost our CEO, and we had to bring in a new CEO, and things just were falling apart left and right. Fundraising was going downhill. The management team had a coup. They all showed up in my office one day. It was just a complete disaster going on. And a lot of the board members who were like the Starbucks personnel, they were like, this was supposed to be fun. I'm not interested in this. Like, this is not fun. Like, I don't want to be meeting here. This is work. It's, it's not fun. And you do discover that there are a lot of people who are really not in it for the hard work. They're in it for the fun. And we did sort of be able to pull. We learned who was really in it and who wasn't. And I think that's another part to this discussion is why I believe that investors should be on the board, because they have a stake. And, it's annoying sometimes they have a stake when times are good, but when times are bad, boy, are you glad you have somebody who is there, who's going to be there and see it through the succession and make sure that there's some great new CEO and raise the game. Because honestly, a lot of the board members wanted to settle on a pretty mediocre candidate for running Jumpstart. And I said, no way, over my dead body, I'm not going to do that. And, killed myself to recruit Rob Waldron. I'm now, by the way, not on the board of Jumpstart, and we're in another search for CEO of Jumpstart. And recently the search committee called me and asked me to come back into the search process because there's no board members as deeply committed to the search. That's way beyond your question. Do you have
I'm on
engagement strategy?
One board I'm on is Breakthrough, Summer Bridge Breakthrough. and it's a big, very good national organization in the sort of summer school and after-school education business. Right before I joined the board, they went through, I think, 4 executive directors in like 4 years. And it's, in many ways, it strengthened the board in really powerful ways because the board had to step up. And the board, you know, was enough turmoil, enough change. It was an old enough organization that had a real proud tradition that the board had to step up financially, being on all those search committees that unfortunately didn't make the right choices initially. And it left a legacy of a very, very empowered board. And there've been a lot of upsides to that, but there've been some downsides. And then I joined the board. A year or two after that, we got a great CEO, Laura Pokop, Stanford Business School graduate. And she's done a great job. And I think, though, the board is almost too strong. And a little bit hasn't like given her enough of her head to kind of run with things. So that's the challenge. Sometimes I wish we'd had more crises at citizen schools. We've had none. And as a result, the board's never had to sort of step up and really prove their mettle. But, you know, it's probably a good high-class problem to have.
So.
Do you often or ever find it helpful to have the CEO be the chairman?
It's interesting. We're now looking for a new chair at citizen schools, and the people who we're looking at are all coming out of the business world. So that's sort of their assumption, because all the boards they're on, the CEO is the chairman. And we've thought about that. I think it would give us less power, not more power. You know, I'm already a great spokesperson for citizen schools. I'd like to have a partner who can be an additional great spokesperson for citizen schools. And I think as long as the chair recognizes that they're not the CEO, and I think while it's good to be retired in a way, in some ways it's good not to be retired. Sometimes if the
Well, it has to be retired with money.
Retired
with money is good.
And with a lot of things
You have
going
chips,
on.
and you can still use the chip bank.
Chip bank is good. But you want the chair to not be confused at all about who's running the organization. That's not to say that if the CEO is screwing up, they shouldn't make a change. But it is to say that there's a difference between being chair, you know, where you can have pet projects, but you tell the CEO, and if the CEO doesn't want to do the pet project, you let it go. And our current chair, who's been here for 5 years, has been tremendous about that. He's been very good at setting a tradition and a framework of, you know, the CEO leads, and it's my job to sort of support the CEO, get the rest of the board supporting the CEO, and evaluating the CEO, and trying to bring in resources.
But when you think of like hiring a partner or a COO, and the process you go through to really think of who's going to be a good partner to you in starting something, or who's going to be, a great second, you should be going through that same level of rigor when you think about your chairperson. And I think I'm amazed at how quick people are to say, by the way, would you be chair? And not have those rigorous conversations, because it's actually sort of a part of your management team. I would agree with Eric, just that I haven't seen it work for the entrepreneur to be the chairman. And I think it's a missed opportunity, also on the fundraising front. You're looking for somebody who can complement what you can bring. And when I talked about the chip bank, I really don't underestimate that. There is, unfortunately, just a pecking order. Like, if you don't have your largest donor in that position or something, people always say, well, what does your chairman do? There's a sense of like, I'm not going to do more than your chairman because I don't want to shine up your chairman. I don't, and so it's really important to get the ecosystem of your board and think about where you want to be in 5 years and bring the chairman on that's going to get you to that next 5 years. And I just love what Eric said about tomorrow's work today, with yesterday's resources. I mean, that is fundamentally a problem, and you have to be bringing on the person who's going to take you to the next level. I also was curious, and was Laura Pocock on the board of Summer Surge? Because I think, Summer
Surge.
Yeah, I just met that with them today. That's fine.
She is she ex officio, or is she sort of?
Because to me, that's when you see
she,
a board that doesn't have their CEO on the board. Like, I'm a voting member of my board, and I'm at every board meeting, and I do think that's when I'm doing an audit of the state of a board. When I see an entrepreneur who's not on their board, I worry about the board.
I agree with that. I also think I think a lot of our organizations, a lot of the staff come to many of the board meetings, and that's good, and that builds sort of an open line of communication. But there ought to be some meetings where it's just CEO and board.
Yeah.
Building that. One thing that I think hasn't come up that much in terms of the characteristic of the early stage board members and in the mid stage for a social entrepreneur organization is that they be entrepreneurs. And whether or not they're worker bees, or whether or not they're wealthy, or whether or not they're big names, I found a huge difference in the people who, whether on the nonprofit side, like Alan Casey from City is on my board, or on the for-profit side, who have actually started companies, grown it from one employee, and scratching for money to going public. And there are a couple of people on our first board who have done that. They get it. And the people who've been entrepreneurs and have built something from scratch into something that's pretty big or very big in the nonprofit or the for-profit world are just better allies and really get the strategy and get the evolution much more than either the nonprofit people from big institutions, Harvard, and they can be really smart people. But if they're in places that have established strategies and just change kind of incrementally year by year, it's really tough to be able to add a lot of value for an organization that's going through huge change, kind of 50% annual growth, and big strategic changes.
Which is where you are now.
Right.
I saw a couple of other hands on this topic.
I'm wondering, I hear you guys say a lot of like tips, like here and there, or like we do this, we do that. I'm wondering if you, especially at New Profit, because you deal with a lot of boards, do you have sort of like a standard board guidelines or like playbook, or like like maybe like a standard set of rules and things that perhaps maybe you could share with us?
I'm honestly embarrassed to say we don't. This meeting is actually honestly making me think that we need to. We do on best practices in consulting, best practices in balanced scorecard, and let me take it as an assignment. Then in the next 3 weeks, I will put this down on paper. In all seriousness, because I think it's worth documenting. We did a major overhaul of Teach for America's board. That was probably the most intensive work. It was a 6-month monitor case team working on this project. It was sort of more intensive than most, and we've documented that process and written a case study on that. But I don't think we've codified it into some basic best practices that would be useful, and I want to challenge myself to do that in a more effective way. I have every HBS article written on boards, and it is hard to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read about, you need ad hoc committees, not permanent committees, and I've read Gazillion Chait and all these different, is that his name? I don't know. Chait, yeah. All these different things, but I've had a hard time making sense of it all, so I don't think we're there yet. It's probably the next important horizon in knowledge building for the nonprofit sector.
Did you share that with us?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe you could just get...
Yeah, I got everyone's email. And
great, I'll just, and I welcome your critique of it as I just try to document even the points we put together here and make a little more sense of it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Forgive my stupidity on this. When you talk about social entrepreneurship, do you actually produce an income from the services you provide? Because the board I sit on, we earn $1 million a year with the services we provide, which are then used as strictly go to the community. So we definitely have to do that. So when you use the term, I needed clarification on that. And then the second and it's actually regarding the balanced scorecard. I sort of read the whole litany of literature and balanced scorecard, and I'm not even sure where to jump in to look for a nonprofit balanced scorecard, because there's so much stuff out there.
I'd look at Eric's.
Okay.
Is one of the best, and I don't know if you're sharing that these days, but we have old ones that we share still today, so yours. And we have a case study, the Harvard Business School case study on the balanced scorecard in the nonprofit sector, so I'm sure there's lots now, but so I'd be concretely happy to share our version of a nonprofit balanced scorecard, because I agree that there's a lot of material these days. Luckily, Monitor just bought the balanced scorecard, and we're trying to make a little more sense of how to make it useful. But just for the definition of social entrepreneurship, that is a very fair question, and probably every one of us might answer that differently. But we are not. New Profit is not focused on any financial return. It's purely social return, but used by trying to imply that there are we're using entrepreneurial practices to solve social problems.
Okay, thank you.
So just clarification on the balanced scorecard. So I see some of you saying, what is that? Bob Kaplan, professor here at Harvard Business School, basically invented this
Private sector.
method of measuring performance for the private sector. The theory there being financial performance is in many ways kind of backward looking, and it doesn't give you much of a sense of if you're headed in the right direction. And there are a whole bunch of internal indicators in organization that should be tracked to let you know if you're on track to meet future objectives, right? And so things like, are you tending to the learning and growth of your people and your capacity? Are you hearing the voice of the customer, building that into product design and service design and improvement, along with financial? And probably, gosh, now looking at this is 6 or 7 years ago, Bob, through his own involvement in the nonprofit sector and some prodding from some people sitting up here.
Just a little side note, but when we were starting New Profit at HBS VCO team, do you still have those? Told me about the balanced scorecard, and we snuck into a meeting saying we were students at Harvard Business School, and he said, get out of my office, this is like, what are you doing here? You're not students. And we said, we got to make the case to you to do this with New Profit. And he listened and he did it, and he's totally had a great experience. But you know, just to let you know how much Harvard Business School's had an impact on, and the students, it was the students who got us into the meeting.
And so this tool that was developed for the private sector has been adapted for the nonprofit sector. It's not just an overlay of a private sector idea onto nonprofits. In fact, it really pushed Bob's thinking, and the learning's gone the other way. He's taken some of what he's learned working.
He had 4 sort of being measures, and we've added a 5th, which is social impact, and flipped it so that it's not about the bottom line, it's about the social impact as the priority sort of thing to measure.
And so he's taken all of this back into his work with companies so that they can, on their kind of corporate social responsibility dimensions, figure out how to measure and track those. So for those of you that are Reynolds Fellows, on the 21st, Bob's coming to your meeting to talk about balanced scorecard in the nonprofit sector. So.
Can we sneak in?
We'll talk about that.
You don't ask permission. Yes, if you're a social entrepreneur, you don't ask permission.
Yes, so
key definition right there.
That's right. The tip of pretending, I guess, to be something else. Annie.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was important to involve the board members into the development of the strategy, but when you have a board that is more focused on fundraising, or you have board members because of their names, I worry that they may not have enough time to get involved into the industry and understand the challenges and opportunities of that particular industry, especially when it's not necessarily easy to understand. So when you get them involved in the strategy, they start asking questions that are not necessarily perhaps like the best use of everybody's time. So I was wondering if you don't see them in that case perhaps more involved in the approval of the strategy and approval of the budget as opposed to getting them involved in the development.
Annie, am I doing that to you? I'm on Annie's board.
What is your organization?
India Schoolhouse Fund.
Building school in India.
Nice. It's a great. The ideal scenario is actually that you do have fundraising board that is able to engage in strategy, because I think what you just said of like investors that are giving money that are really, it's easy to look at a strategy and say, yeah, that looks like a good one. But if you go through the process of making the choices between this strategy versus that strategy, you get much more deeply committed to the end game of what you're doing. And so I've often found that you can actually pretty rapidly, like a good 3-hour session with the board with a great facilitator can drive. You can have some off questions, and you can say, that's an off question, let me get back to you. And, and you as an entrepreneur have to then circle back with them to get them up to speed. But you could, in a 3-hour session, open it up enough so in the early stages, but help them. It's like herding cats, but it's a very important engagement tool to get them deeply committed. One of the things I would say is the culture of the board is very important. I'd say right now, and some of the boards I'm on, they're the best board and then the worst board, all in the same year. But I'll say today, the College Summit board is one of the best boards that I'm on. Chuck Harris, some of you might know, Sea Change Capital Partners, is the chairman. And he and I work very closely on the board. And we do a night before dinner, which is important for the bonding and connection and building sort of the camaraderie, and then intensely strategic discussions that are kept at a high level so they're not into the deep management. And he's constantly helping people say, you know what, that's a great question. That's not really a board issue. Let's pass that over to the staff. That's a great question. That's a strategic issue. You know, and that playing that facilitative role and directing and leading, I mean, it's a bunch of disparate people that, sometimes look around the room and say, what are we all doing in this room together? And so there has to be somebody, and it's hard for it to be the social entrepreneur, who's constantly herding that group and directing them in a facilitated way.
I would also say that the role of the board is not to develop the strategy, it's to make the strategy better by pushing and asking the right questions of the social entrepreneur. And then within strategy, like if you take our example, it's not the board's going to be less well equipped to push on what's the pedagogical approach we should take or how should we evolve the program model. But as we think about issues of growth, think about issues of where do we put power in the regions or in the national office, think about just rate of growth issues, diversity of sort of our business model. Those are things I think they at least can ask really good questions about. And so I think if you don't put them in a position of sort of trying to invent the strategy, which is I think tough to do, and not their role, but if you say, here's kind of our best thinking to date,
Yes.
and push me on it, and ask good questions about it, and it's going to improve my understanding of the strategy through that kind of a dialogue. And they're going to then get to understand it better, which means they can kind of sell it better and be more engaged with it and care more about it.
So we only got a few minutes left. We have a long list of other items. Why don't, instead of moving to later stage,
I think we kind of started into later
I
stage.
think we did. Just a more general question, like how do you, once you've sort of tricked someone into joining your board through these strategy sessions and other things. There was a great question earlier
About orientation.
Yeah, about how do you, I think Will asked it, right? How do you get people up to speed quickly so they can hit the ground running as a good new board member? I know you both think about that because you're board members, so there's some ways you do that.
I think there's a lot we can learn from other people. There's a woman, Roxanne Spillett, who runs the Big Brothers Big Sisters, and she teaches a course on board management out at Notre Dame, and it'd be great for you to get some of her materials, and she's written a lot on this topic, and has thought a lot about that particular issue of how do you onboard board members, and I think she's going to write some stuff about that in the near future. And we've done, the simplest thing we've done is kind of give them the board books. We put a lot of effort into putting together a really good board book for each meeting. And it's sort of, 100 pages of required reading and another 100 or so pages of optional reading, a couple of PowerPoints up front that kind of frame the big issues. And so the simplest thing is to give them the board books from the last 2 or 3 board meetings so they can kind of catch up to speed through that. Try to make sure they've seen the program in action before they join the board, and then they're refreshed so that we try to get each board member to come see the program each year. And we try to get them increasingly to see it in California or Texas or different parts of the country. And then I think a lot of it is just, our model's learning by doing, and it's learning through the board meetings. And so one new board member who's probably going to be our next chair is a Bain Capital guy named Andrew Balson. He just joined our board a year ago. And it was really in the first couple of meetings and just observing other people but kind of jumping in that he got kind of fully oriented. And it was a great experience for him because he'd been on just a couple other nonprofit boards that found them very unsatisfying, unstrategic. He's like, what am I doing here? And he came into this situation, and he's also on the board of Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King and a lot of big companies. Said, this is the kind of board I'm used to, where we're really dealing with strategic issues and we're wrestling with things. And I think his orientation was just through the first few meetings, not more than anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is just making sure you're processing with your board members how they're absorbing the board meetings afterwards. I think sometimes I don't know, for me, I mean, you do a whole board meeting and like, you're just completely fried after the board meeting and not taking the time to actually follow up and see what the new board members are perceiving. We are adding a set of board members, and in addition to this sort of growth committee where we're testing them out, once they've sort of made that hurdle, they come to 2 board meetings before they're added to the board, where they're learning and absorbing and understanding the culture. Because the second you're added to the board, you have this sort of feeling like I have to start delivering. But if you're asked to visit, you can really go and listen and learn and not have to deliver. And it gives them the chance. So like Duncan McFarland's come to 2 board meetings, he's starting to really get it, and now he's not pressured to have to deliver in those first 2 board meetings, so it gives people a little chance to have a learning curve. And also us to test them out.
Any last question or two? We've got about 4 minutes left. This has been really terrific. Yeah.
So just to take the flip side of this last question, is there anything specific that you would like to hear a new board member ask? Are there any questions that would be particularly revealing or enlightening for a new board member? Or what's the best way for a board member to get information from the organization?
I think this could seem sort of self-serving, but I think the most important question for a board member to ask is how can I help and how can I support you? And CEOs, I think, of fast growth social entrepreneur organizations are in a difficult place, trying to do really hard work kind of against the odds. And I think the most important question for the chair to ask is how can I support what you're doing? How can I support you? And so that's sort of a good sign for me when the board members kind of get that the nonprofit leadership team is sort of has a good strategy, we can make it better, has a great track record, and needs support and take it to the next level. And instead of sort of it all being about what can you do for me, and more what can I do for you.
And it really is a social contract. I mean, when one of our portfolio organizations, the CEO really took time to write out their expectations of the board, and then we, as monitor and new profit, interviewed the board members about that expectation. It was shocking how different the board members' expectations of their role versus the entrepreneur, and how far a divide, and then how among board members the different views. And this board had been functioning for 2 or 3 years this way, and you kind of wondered how on earth they made decisions, because they had completely different views of their role. And in the orientation packet, I think it's important to go through an annual review of the role of the board, and then revisit that and make sure we're all clear on the purpose and the role and expectations, because it just gets so out of whack. And when things are in crisis, it just can either just completely fall apart or it can bring everybody together.
Yeah, just following up on the idea of a role, I'm thinking particularly of you, Vanessa, as a social entrepreneur and a funder and a potential board member. How do you think of your role when you step into a board? Because I'm sure for a lot of social entrepreneurs, it might be the first time they've had a social entrepreneur in that role for them, and how they respond to you and how you think of your engagement.
I mean, I think I have a really, really unique and wonderful position, because while I come in as an investor and with a perspective, because I'm a social entrepreneur, the perspective is as somebody who's aligned with the entrepreneur. And I can often take unaligned people in a board. Like I work with a lot of, Gates is now about on every one of the boards of our portfolio organizations. And you have Gates, you have Eli Broad, Dell, those are the 3 that are often on a number of boards, and very different perspectives. And what's different about New Profit is because it's about social entrepreneurship first, and not about our answer to the education problem, and we don't have a particular perspective on education. I have, in 2 different board situations, had to facilitate the other investors towards a common belief around the entrepreneur. And so it's sometimes hard because I have to play a little bit in both worlds, but everybody knows that I'm ultimately going to side with the social entrepreneur.
One of the smartest things I ever heard about boards was from my dad, who's chaired a number of boards. And it came out through a process he went through as he became chair of the Natural Resources Defense Council. And they were looking at the issue of what should be the board's role versus the CEO's role as leading the organization. And he said of the really important decisions that the organization faces, but the whole range of decisions, probably 90% of those decisions the CEO makes and the board either finds out about after the fact or doesn't even find out about. 9, and that's appropriate. There's a lot of decisions to make in running an organization. Probably 9% of the decisions the CEO should make, but a wise CEO should really listen to the board before he makes those decisions. But ultimately, the CEO should make that decision. And probably 1% of the important decisions that are made over the course of a year in an organization should be made by the board, but a wise board will really listen to the CEO before they make that decision. I think that's about right, the kind of 90, 9, then 1, and really the importance of And while the ultimate decision on that 1% is with the board, listen to the CEO, and on the 9%, ultimate decisions with the CEO, but listen to the board before
So some common themes here, right? Even though you might be starting up, you can still be really thoughtful about where you're headed with your board and set things up as short-term commitments, term limits, those kinds of things. Making clear expectations up front that we all understand the board's going to change as we go, and giving yourself a way to do that, so you don't end up in Vanessa's position, with 22 board members to reform your board, and Eric having to give the tough news to his founding board that it's time to move on, learn those lessons, and build that in from the beginning. And then just generally good communication about both process and expectations between the entrepreneur and the board member, and thinking about alignment all along the way, regardless of what stage you're in as growth. This was terrific. Thanks to both of you. Great questions. Let's give all of them.
We, as Vanessa mentioned, I'm Eric Schwarz with Citizen Schools. Started out at the beginning of New Profit. We were about in year 4, year 5. They were in year 1. Their next strategy, she didn't mention this, but the next strategy is going to be looking at mezzanine financing for the nonprofit sector, and we're again going to explore that. Because we want to keep on the cutting edge.
By the way, we should say we're next door neighbors, and this is constantly debated. Eric might invent that part of New Profit so that we can do it.
Yeah, we're going to get the right board in there, and they'll be all set. But Citizen Schools, which started 12 years ago in Boston, really comes out of as an after-school program, but it's really looking to reinvent education and how we think about education across the country. And it comes out of a couple of core beliefs, one of which is that education is really more important than ever before to driving access to the American dream and driving opportunity. And the difference between sort of a high school graduate and a college graduate in terms of what they earned used to be the college graduate a generation ago earned about 30% more than the high school graduate. Today, the college graduate earns twice as much as the high school graduate, and that gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So education is just more important than ever before to driving access to the American dream, number one. Number two, education is unbelievably unequally distributed. And you have among families, among kids who grew up in upper income families, top economic quartile, a 98% likelihood of doing at least some college, and a 60% likelihood of finishing a 4-year college by age 25. And among kids who grew up in a lower income family, only 50% chance of doing a little bit of college, and a 7% chance of finishing a 4-year college by age 25. So education is unbelievably unequally distributed. And our third core belief is that school reform alone is not enough to change those numbers. We've been trying really hard as a country to change schools. We've doubled the amount of money we spend on schools per pupil after adjusting for inflation.
Before we launch into some kind of more formal panel discussion, okay? So let me do a quick intro of our panelists, and then we'll open the floor, and you can just say what's on my mind about boards is. And then that'll help us think about how to frame our time, since we don't have much time together. We've only got about an hour together, okay? So we'll do that. So Vanessa Kirsch from New Profit Inc. and Eric Schwarz from Citizen Schools, why don't you each take 3 or 4 minutes just to say who you are, what your organization does, and then we'll open the floor to some stuff on people's minds.
Well, it's great to be here. Boards is one of my favorite topics, mostly because I've had a lot of failed boards, but hopefully New Profit's board I've learned a lot of lessons and made some improvements and learned a lot. But New Profit Inc., I'm assuming maybe some people know what it is, but we're a venture capital fund for the nonprofit sector. And really, actually, Eric helped start it and was one of our first investments. The theory behind it was that it's a fascinating thing. 115 nonprofits start a day in the United States now. And one of the challenges is that 91% of them have budgets under $1 million. So we have a sector that's made up of a lot of really wonderful solutions to social problems, but none of them are truly scaled. And the number, there are only 35 nonprofits that are in the sort of social change arena, not hospitals or universities, that have gotten to $20 million since in the past 30 years. So we sort of pondered the question, why not? And as you look at the private sector, you see that the private sector has a very sophisticated entrepreneurial system, that helps take that invention in a garage, and there are angel investors and venture capitalists and their private equity funds and investment banks that sort of take that organization through a set of phases. And aligned with that are consultants who help the startup entrepreneur, who come and help the mid-stage company. There's a whole consulting, accounting, management system. There are business schools like these that are really promoting entrepreneurship. And our belief was just that if we could do that same thing in the social sector, if we could really figure out how to take the best of the private sector, the best of the social sector, and create not only new profit, which is a demonstration, but fundamentally what we're passionate about is figuring out how we really create a whole social capital market that helps us take great social innovations to scale. And that's going to require ultimately the bringing together of, I think we have to get government, business, academia, nonprofit sector to work together to think very systemically about how we solve social problems. So in a nutshell, New Profit is really a demonstration of that model, and we have about 50 investors. They're mostly private equity, venture capital, entrepreneurs, different people like that who pool their money, and we make $1 million cash investments in a set of organizations and then provide $1 million of consulting, because we're based at a consulting firm called Monitor, which is a management consulting firm. Monitor has done $30 million of pro bono assistance to our whole portfolio so far. And so we engage over a period of 4 years we're early growth capital to organizations to help them build their strategic plans, their balanced scorecard. We use Robert Kaplan and Alan Kaplan, our investors, and personally do the scorecards of our organizations. And then we do help the organizations through the first phase of sort of becoming higher impact and more sustainable. And we take board seats, so I'm going to talk a lot about sort of the role of being an investor and having a board seat versus a citizen board seat.
Folks from all the graduate schools here, see some HBS people, Kennedy School people, Ed School people. That's all great. See some Reynolds Fellows and some non-Reynolds Fellows, also great. So here's what we're going to do tonight. In a second, we'll introduce our panelists who are here, and we were just chatting. We'd like to do this as informally as possible versus a more formal format. By the way, I'm Stacey Childress. I'm on the faculty here at the business school, where I teach a course on entrepreneurship and education reform. And so while I have a broad interest in social entrepreneurship, I've spent most of my time over the last about 3 years thinking most specifically about organizations that are education related and entrepreneurial. So that's how I come at this. And I get on the faculty here and teach a second year elective. I also have had just the great privilege and challenge this year of working with something called the Reynolds Fellows, which are students from all over Harvard who are themselves social entrepreneurs or aspiring social entrepreneurs and are at one of what they call public service schools, so either the Ed School, the Kennedy School, or the School of Public Health. So if you're a Reynolds Fellow, you just kind of give us a wave. So it looks like about half the room probably Reynolds Fellows and half others. And so it's nice to have kind of a mix of folks who don't normally get to interact with each other in a classroom. So welcome. So here's what we're going to do. The kind of big topic tonight is how social entrepreneurs think about boards of directors. So we have a focus topic on boards, but we could cover that ground for hours, right? I mean, there are lots of topics under that heading to talk about. And so what Vanessa and I were just talking about was it would be nice to hear from a few of you what's on your mind about board.
Over the last generation, and we've gotten really limited results. I mean, we think just if you keep schools in the box of 180 days a year, 6.5 hours a day, you could change who the teachers are and change the curriculum and change the standards, but in that box, we're not going to fundamentally change access to the American dream and change the quality of education that kids are getting. And so the premise of citizen schools, in resting on those beliefs, is that what we need to change is time and caring adults in kids' lives. And so we've built a model, starting at one school in Boston and now spreading to 5 states across the country, that works to fill up the afternoon hours and the weekend hours with really intensive learning activities, built around an apprenticeship model where we recruit thousands now across the country of citizen teachers, who are lawyers and architects and chefs and web designers, and ask them, along with the professional staff of young educators, to work with kids after the final bell rings. We add 40% to 50% more learning time for kids we work with, and we focus on middle school age kids. We build the curriculum around these apprenticeships at the core, where kids get a chance to argue mock trials in front of federal judges and design new websites for their school and work with architects to come up with new designs for what should go on the Rose Kennedy Greenway, work with engineers at Yahoo and Google to take apart computers and build up websites. And we also have a real rigorous kind of academic component where kids are getting homework help, coaching on their writing and data analysis. The 8th graders are going to visit 10 college campuses over the course of the year and getting kind of coaching as to how they choose the right high school and get ready to choose the right college. We've been very focused on results, which is more common in the nonprofit sector, but still not super common. And we've done a big external evaluation that we're about 4 years into that shows very strong results for our kids, not only when they're in the program, but after they leave the program. They go on to much better high schools, they do much better.